Hello and welcome to another edition of the Rams Review podcast preview, and it's game two, first game at Pride Park against the mighty Middlesbrough. And we're joined by a friend of the show who's done this previously a couple of times now, and that's Tom Green from the Boro Breakdown podcast. Tom, how are you?
Very good, thank you, mate. Happy to be back on talking to you guys after you spell out of the league. I knew it wouldn't last long.
Yeah, well, trust me, 2 years felt like a very, very long time, and
I
obviously
can imagine.
with the history of Borough and all that you went through, for people who are as old as me, I remember when Borough went through some really difficult times at Ayresome Park where they put the locks on the gates and no one was allowed in, and who knows what was going to happen. But thankfully, a club with the history of Borough is thriving in the Championship, and we're pleased to be joining you back there. So we'll talk about Borough. This is your 15 minutes to tell us all about your team and how they're doing. But let's start from last year. Disappointing season. You finished eighth, 69 points. You won 20. You lost 17 and conceded, looking at your stats here, 62 goals. Disappointment clearly from the previous season where you finished fourth, had more wins, less defeats, and fewer conceded. What went wrong?
Well, I think we were maybe over the disappointment in the first few months of the season. I don't think we won a game in 7 at the start of last season, and you know, from the season before, we obviously lost Chuba Akpom, we lost Ryan Giles, we lost Cameron Archer and Aaron Ramsey, who both went back. So it was rebuilding really, and we brought in a new crop of players, all good players, and maybe some of us did get a little bit carried away and still expected the world of our team at the start of last season. But it took a while for them to gel, and by the time that had happened, we'd already given a lot of teams a big head start. We were very inconsistent in the middle bit of the season. And then I believe we won something like 12 and 13 towards the end of the season. And I was saying on our podcast throughout last season, this has all the makings of a team that's going to click, but not quite click in time. We're probably just going to miss out on the playoffs. And some of these players are going to really start showing what they're all about towards the end of the season. And I was quite unhappy to be proven right with that, because obviously the way the season panned out, we didn't make the playoffs. We still had a chance up until, I think it was a few games before the start of the season. We still could have mathematically made it, but we just gave ourselves too much to do. But it looks like last season was very much a transition season, and then leading into this season, we've tried to keep a bit of stability and regularity in the lineup going into this season. So it should be different to this season than it was the last season.
Do you think it was a transition of players in and players out, or do you think a lot of it was to do with the hangover from that disappointment against Coventry in the playoff semi-finals the previous season?
I honestly think it was a transition in terms of the playing staff. You look at the players we lost and then who we brought in. Emmanuel Atelaf, he comes in from Atalanta. Wasn't playing too much in Serie A. He was playing in the Swiss league. Took a little bit of time to get going. I think it was our third or fourth game of last season. We were playing QPR at home. He missed about 5 one-on-ones, and we were all kind of thinking, yeah, he's fast and he can dribble, but he doesn't look like he has any composure. Morgan Rogers, another one, he started the season up front. Eventually kind of comes back towards the attacking midfield area. But he wasn't exactly great straight away. I mean, the season before he was on loan at Blackpool, and then you look at where he went in the January of the same season and what he's doing now. Like at the start of the season, we'd have never expected that from him. So those players I've mentioned there, and there are other examples of it as well. It wouldn't have necessarily been a hangover for them because they weren't here. They were just generally finding their feet. coupled with that, we did have a hell of an injury crisis throughout last season, and there was a point where playing Leeds away, we had to stick Matt Clark in, who obviously you guys will be familiar with. He had been out for about a year with a back injury. I think it was a nerve injury, and I mean there were rumors going around that he's never going to play football again and stuff like that. He was on the bench. I'm sure the plan was to bring him in slowly, and Paddy McNair goes off injured, and we had to stick Matt Clark in at the back, who's not played in a year. And to be fair to him, he's done absolutely astoundingly well since then. But yeah, we were really down to the bare bones at sometimes last season.
Yeah, Matt Clark was consistent with Derby. He's not exactly got pace, but he reads the game so well. And just looking at his player profile here, I see he's got even less hair now than he had. He was fighting to keep it at Derby for the time he was with us, but clearly he's lost that battle, and now he's holding the goal, the bold look really well. So let's go into squad depth a bit more. You've brought us into that perfectly. Looking at your profiles of your players, you've got a lot of nationalities in there. Even with your keepers, you've got a lad from New Zealand, or Australia. I never know
Australia, yeah.
which one the flag is, and I believe Senny Deng is he Cameroon or Senegalese? It's
Senegal, I think.
Senegal, isn't he?
Yeah.
Um, and then looking through it's the squad that there's some very familiar faces. Luke Ayling, obviously, we all know Luke from his time at Leeds, and then Matt Clark, and then going through again right into your midfield. There's a Johnny Howson, for instance, but it seems to be a squad that I would probably think that no Derby player could name more than four or five. Has this been built literally this last sort of 12 months, or is there a lot of established players still here with Boro that are just sort of I don't know, are they aging? Are they over their prime? Sort of tell us about the squad.
I'd say it's maybe been built over the last 24 months, maybe. So it probably started just as we got rid of Warnock and Chris Wilder took over. Before Warnock left, we brought in Kieran Scott from Norwich as our head of football. He was head of recruitment at Norwich, I think it was, and he's really set about changing what the club is and the model we have, and kind of the backroom setup. So our scouting team's gone completely different now. Under Wilder, we brought in players like Darrell Lenihan from Blackburn on a free transfer, and that was probably the start of it, of this kind of project. Like I said, at the end of the season where Wilder left and Carrick took over, we lost our loan players, who obviously went back to the parent clubs and moved on to other things. Lost Chuba Akpom. Zach Steffen's another one I didn't mention. He obviously went back to City, so we replaced them with Dieng. And then you look at some of the players that we brought in. One of our centre backs who's playing at the moment in a pairing with Matt Clark is Rav van den Berg. Some people might be familiar with his brother Sepp, who plays for Liverpool. He's been in and around the Championship on loan. We we got linked to him, and it was like we're linked to this 17-year-old Dutch centre back from Pexwolle in Netherlands, and no one had a clue who he was. And I think he actually turned 18 just after he joined us, so we didn't start the season with a 17-year-old centre back in. He did start on the bench, but injuries forced him to play more of a role after that. And he was amazing. He came into the squad, and like some of the, I mean, you mentioned Matt Clark reading the game. Well, Rav van den Berg's amazing at it, and he wins a lot of ground duels and stuff like that. And it's maybe just showing what our recruitment is all about now. We are trying to find these kind of young players with potential sell-on value, and bring them into the club and develop them, and eventually they might move onto bigger things. We're not necessarily a selling club in the way that I might be an unfair comparison, but Brentford seemed to sell a lot of players when they were going through the Championship, and and had a what I think is a high turnover. We're not necessarily a high turnover team. Going into this season, there was interest in Emmanuel Latte-Laugh, Hayden Hackney, Rav van den Berg, and Kieran Scott was saying we're open to bids at like ridiculous prices for these players. But if we want to go up, we need to keep our best players. So it is very much the case that we're finding these players who have potential, developing them, which Carrick and his coaching staff do really well at, and then hopefully keeping hold of them. But the thing is, the more and more of these players that we're getting, the easier it seems to be to convince other players to believe in this project. We've just signed Micah Hamilton last week from Man City. He was convinced on the project by Carrick. He's also spoken to Morgan Rogers for a reference on the area and the club, and he got a glowing review. So yeah, he joined, and then also we're after Tommy Conway from Bristol at the moment. From what I've read, it seems like he spoke to Carrick and Kieran Scott and was convinced. So we seem to kind of have that pulling power now for these younger players. And although loan players were what we were relying on in that season under Chris Wilder, where Carrick took over, this has really been the case of us building probably over the last year or so to get the club to where it is now.
So that's a really good insight to a squad and great depth. Now we sort of bring that squad into last week's performance that you had against Swansea, and looking at the stats here, you got the 1-0 win, great start. But the stats are bonkers. And I say why. 18 shots on goal to 5, yet Swansea had 64%, you had 36%. Your passing accuracy was only 75%, and you outpassed by over 200 passes, yet you had 13 shots more, of which 4 on target. What is the formula to that? What's the tactic? Because they are very strange stats.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised the possession percentages were that wide away, um, because we are a possession team and we do try and play out from the back and we have that set way of playing. Swansea are the same, and what we did notice in last week's game was Swansea really only had one game plan, and it was to attack us down the wings and get crosses in. Now, when you're getting crosses in and you got Van den Berg and Matt Clark in the centre reading everything, that explains why they weren't able to create that much. I mean, the first half, I don't believe they had a shot, and in the overall game, I don't think it was a shot on target. Might have been 6 shots off target, but
Yeah, they didn't. No, none on target at all.
yeah. So our defense did a really good job of keeping that out, and I wonder if that was maybe a game plan that we knew Swansea were going to do with that, and or we read it early in the game and thought we're happy for them to go out wide because the more balls are pumping in the box, we're just heading it clear. We do seem to be a little bit more direct and creative this year. So I mean, I was quite surprised with the amount of chances that we got that we didn't stick away. It could have easily been 3 or 4. And Swansea were never really a threat in that game. As much as I don't like kind of putting other teams down or anything like that, but it never looked likely that they were going to do anything. Whereas every time we went forward, it looked dangerous, and I'm really not used to that with Boro. I'm 31 now. I've been a Boro fan through some great times and also some really bad times. I'm never used to that from Boro. So yeah, it was good to see last week that and added on to that, we hadn't won on the first game of the season in 10 years. So, added a little bonus to us there.
Well, the way you describe Swansea is a perfect description for Derby County. That's exactly Paul Warne football. And for fans who are listening to this now, they're probably going, oh dear. Because that is basically our plan A, our plan B, and plan C. So, Paul Warne, if you're listening to this, which I doubt, but if he is, please find a plan B as quickly as possible, because it sounds to me as if we're in for a very long day. So a player to watch. Give us one player who you think is going to be Boro's star man going forward this season.
It's hard to look past Emmanuel Latte-Laugh at the moment. what was it? He scored. It might have actually been him that scored 12 and 13 towards the end of last season. I might have got that stat mixed up. He had a hell of a goal scoring run at the end of last season. He was scoring all kinds of goals as well. It was goals that you wouldn't necessarily expect him to score. Um, I I don't know if you saw it or if anyone listening would have seen it. Goal he scored against Leeds towards the end of the season. Ball goes over the top, and it looks to everyone that it's just going to bounce over to the keeper. And he's got a hell of a leap on him as well for the size that he is, because he's not a tall player. He leaps up in the air, gets his head on it, loops it over the Leeds keeper, and in. And you're just kind of like, how many other strikers have you ever seen score a goal like that? He'll get on the end of stuff that you don't think is even possible. Added on to that, he's very quick. He's because of his height, he's got a low center of balance, so he can turn quite quickly, and he's deceptively strong as well. I've seen him put some big players on the backsides last season. So yeah, as a striker, I'd say all he's missing is a little bit of composure and a little bit of consistency at times. But he's definitely one to look out for this season.
Sounds like a classic championship player, and they're in the championship for that very reason, that the composure and the finishing. If they
Yeah.
had both those assets, they'd be in the Premier League, no doubt. So, okay, so the Derby player to watch that Borough fans will be looking out for, who do you think that will be and why?
Well, I've got it on another screen here. I mean, I had to I had to do a quick Google because, I mean, no offense to you, Darby, or anyone listening. I've really been tunnel visioned on Borough during this pre-season. I did a Swansea podcast last week. I didn't have a clue who was playing for them, but immediately standing out to me on this list is Nathaniel Mendez-Lang, who people might remember played for Borough under Neil Warnock. I think it might have only been around a 6 month contract. We called him the Fridge on our podcast because he's built like one. But I vividly remember scoring him with him scoring a pretty decent chip. It might have been against Chef Wed, but I'm not entirely sure. But I was in the COVID season, I think. Oh yeah, it might have been. But I can remember watching that chip go in and just thinking this guy's going to be great for us. And it never happened for him at Borough. But as is the case with anyone who played for Borough and then it didn't happen and then moved elsewhere, it probably means he's going to score past us at some point.
Yeah, I think he had some personal issues as well over that stint, didn't he? His head wasn't quite in the right place, and there was allegations of all kinds of nonsense. So, but he has become a stalwart of Derby over the last two or so years. He's now wearing the captain's armband, and he is very consistent. And I think he's found his place. He's now far more mature than he has been, because the list of clubs that he's had have gone up and down from Borough, Rochdale, Sheff Wednesday, but he's definitely one to watch. So finally, on the preview, I always ask our guests three questions. So the first question is your top three for the championship end of season. Who's going up?
Oh, well, we had our season preview a couple of weeks ago, so I'm just going to give the same answers that I gave there: Burnley, Leeds, and Borough.
So you think Borough via the playoffs? You think you've got that experience to see home?
You know what? It's a bit of an out there prediction, but I had us beating Coventry in the playoff final.
Revenge is
I've,
sweet.
well, yeah, be the nice end to that story.
Absolutely. And your bottom three relegation fodder, Tom, who do you think is going to really struggle? And please feel free, if you feel that it's going to be us, then don't hold back.
We'll see. On our season preview, I did go Oxford, Derby, and Hull, but I might switch one of Oxford and Derby out for Plymouth at the moment because they do not look good at all.
No, that was one thing that Derby fans have been holding on to. Like, we weren't bad against Blackburn. For 50 minutes, we were probably the better team. And then we just capitulated because we defended as if we were still in League One. And you know, and I know, Tom, the gulf between making mistakes from one league to another league is chalk and cheese. And we got punished within 12 minutes. And always happens to Derby. An ex-player comes back and haunts us. So finally, your score prediction for Saturday. It's a trip to Pryor Park where you guys haven't been for a while. How do you see the game going?
To be honest, with the way we played against Swansea, I can't look past a Boro win. And I hate doing this. I hate coming on to other teams' podcasts and saying we're going to win because usually I try and be like, oh no, I'm quite respectful. I'll go with a draw or something like that. I think given I've watched both games, if both teams play like they did, I can't look past Borough for that. I also had a bit of a bet builder suggestion on our pod last week that Matt Clark would score because that would be written as well from what you've just said.
It always happens to the amount of Derby players that come back to Pryor Park and haunt us. We've got a list as long as my arm. Well, I'm going to go for a 0-0. I think that Derby have got a very important game this week also with Chesterfield to establish some confidence. I think most importantly, I'm not too concerned about scoring against you. We just need to shut shop at the back. I think if we can have a clean sheet, it'll give us massive confidence. I don't think you've got too much to worry about up front. We still look very disjointed, and we're very good on the set piece, which is something that Warren is infamous for, as you know. So I'll go for a 0-0. Tom, it's been fantastic. It's always great to catch up with you. Where can people find the Boro Breakdown podcast to follow you and see how the Boro go throughout the season?
So I believe it's Borough_breakdown on Twitter, but we're also on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts, really.
Brilliant. Thanks, Tom. Well, that's the review for game 2 in the championship season. Derby County versus Middlesbrough at Pryor Park this Saturday coming. Tom, thank you for your time. And
Yeah, no
fans
problem at
out
all.
there, we'll see you soon. Goodbye.